Hello, my name is Ken Small and I'm with SSA Architecture. I practice architecture here in Las Vegas, Nevada and the Clark County area, Southern Nevada. I'm licensed in California and Arizona. During this video, I'm going to talk to you about outdoor eating areas in the Las Vegas area, the area immediately adjacent to the city of Las Vegas. So we have another video which I'll encourage you to watch after this that explains the entitlement process, but I just want to talk about isolating the issue of outdoor eating, and then if you need entitlement process, you can watch the entitlement process video on how to do that. So a lot of people think that to do outdoor eating at their house, they just order up a caterer or put out some tables or some chairs or what have you, and boom, they got outdoor eating, which is absolutely true for their house. But if you have a restaurant, if you have a business where you're going to provide an outdoor eating area for your staff, or even outdoor smoking area, depending on the size of it, for the employer and employees outdoor eating area, you may be subject to this or not. But definitely for a restaurant or a drinking establishment, like someone selling tea or smoothies or something like that. Not going to talk about alcohol right now because that's a further level of complication, but given the issue of COVID, outdoor eating has become really popular. And so a lot of restaurants that have been in existence for a long time have switched to outdoor eating areas. And I have found that the approval process is almost random, that while technically they should have gone through some other kind of approval process or some other kind of analysis, that they didn't. Some did, some didn't. So I'm just going to talk to you about if you're building a new eating and drinking establishment and you want to have outdoor eating, what is the situation? And in a lot of the parts of the country where I have worked before, in rural Texas and some areas in a lot of other states, I'm also licensed in Arizona and California, there can be a situation where you can just decide to put tables out, or maybe if you're at a shopping center, you get the shopping center operator's permission, but that is typically not the situation in the Las Vegas area. So this is kind of a two-pronged problem, and number one issue is that it's a planning and zoning issue. And so what that means is you need permission from planning and zoning to move your dining or drinking outside in addition inside. And so that entails the entitlement process. Now, let me just clarify a little bit that there are apparently some areas of the downtown that are kind of touristy areas and where they have special use zoning. Some of the places where there's no parking requirements downtown, that the approval process is pretty informal, pretty fast. But if you're out in a fairly new shopping center, or let us say a normal neighborhood shopping center, and you want to put out tables for people to eat at, it's not an option unless you go through the approval process. And so what we would do is we would do a little drawing showing what's proposed, and then submit it to them, and then they go through a process which can be fairly time consuming. Some people use lawyers for this instead of architects. On one job we're involved in now on the architectural side, there was an attorney hired. I'm sure that the attorney never told me what he cost, but I'm sure that you'll be looking at a couple $1,000s to do that. Probably more with the attorney. And so again, just like we would submit on a new building or on an exterior change in a commercial area, we draw up what's proposed. They want to know some information on the submission, which is fairly detailed, and then that's submitted, and then there's a planner that reviews it, and then the planner puts it into a succession of reviews and public hearings, and then it's approved. So that process is pretty easy to get through in most cases. If alcohol is involved, it can be more complicated, but if it's not, then it's fairly simple if the neighbors don't complain. But you just have to go through the steps, and in recent experience, it's about 120 days. Some areas that you would assume outdoor eating or external to the suite eating is going to be not a problem because so many are doing it. These shopping centers that are set up to look like old-fashioned downtowns, for instance, you still have to go through the same process. Now, there may be a pre-stated allowability of it in the zoning, but that doesn't mean you don't still have to go through the process of applying and getting approved. And so there's a big one in Henderson and a big one in southern, on the south end of the Strip. And we've been involved in projects that we're thinking of doing that in both cases. And in both cases, it's a long time. And didn't seem to be any possibility of getting turned down on the planning and zoning side. But it's time consuming. It's a submission process. Time is money, and so on. So if you're going to do outdoor eating or drinking area, then what goes along with it? Are you actually going to build anything? So say you're going to delineate the area by laying out planter boxes and tables and chairs, then that's all furniture. Then there's really not a permit or construction process associated with it. But most of these type of projects, we did one downtown a couple of years ago where they wanted to build a 3-foot high fence, and so you have to apply for a fence permit. And in that particular case of the downtown location, they were subject to a more streamlined process, and so I think they got through it in about a month. But again, a lot of questions were asked and so on. And so then that takes you to what if you're doing it as part of a new restaurant, or what if the effect of the fence or the outdoor eating area has some building code related interpretation according to the building department. So if you can avoid getting wrapped up in the building department as part of this process, that's probably a good idea, but it's not something that can normally be done. And so when you submit, they're going to look at those additional people sitting out on the quote sidewalk, which is really not the public sidewalk, but the private sidewalk in the shopping center or something like that, based on a number of people per square foot. And so it's a pretty high ratio of people per square foot. You would actually not really think in the real world that many people could fit. And so for this reason, the high number of people per square foot is for not fixed seating. So if you put out picnic benches or something that was fixed, some of the fast food places have a outdoor eating table with chairs attached to it. Then we can just count the chairs, and that's how many people you're allowed to have. That would be added to the number of people that calculated inside the restaurant. And so for that reason, then you're possibly going to be concerned with the number of toilets that you have. So say you have a men's and a ladies, and we calculated it, and it's enough for the number of occupants in the restaurant. Then when you add the outdoor eating area, it's not enough. So you could get stuck building a second additional restrooms as a result of this, and so that might not be too viable for you. So it would be worthwhile to look at the numbers preliminarily before jumping into it with both feet. Then the next thing with respect to the indoor-outdoor eating relationship is that we had one project that was processed through an attorney. They got the entitlement in planning and zoning. Then we provided drawings for submission to get a fence permit. And by a fence, I mean, I don't know, about 50 feet of fence, a very small amount of fence, about 3 feet high, with a gate on it. And then the building department came back and they wanted to reanalyze the fire exiting on the restaurant because part of it went through that outdoor eating area. And it's hard to say because the way they state things is so vague. But I always thought once you're outside the door, you're outside and that's it. You've complied with the fire code requirements for getting out of the restaurant. But actually what they seem to be saying is that they're treating that as an intervening room. And so the story on intervening rooms is that basically, there's a lot to it, but just for our purposes here, that when you go in and out of a restaurant, you're only allowed one intervening room. So let us say the front of your restaurant has an airlock. So that's go through 2 doors, and then those doors close, and then go through 2 more doors, which allows the air conditioning not to go outside in the summertime, or the heating to go outside in the wintertime. So that airlock is an intervening room. It could also be a reception area in a doctor or dentist's office. And then the back intervening room would be labeled like a receiving area where the deliveries would come, or something like that. And so if you added an outdoor eating area on top of that, it's possible that they would not allow it because it's a second intervening room because it has a fence. And I'll tell you, while I make this ridiculous argument, I don't believe it, but that's an interpretation that we're getting on a current job with the building department. So I want to make everyone aware that that could be a possibility. So what are the issues you want to look at on the construction side? Well, one is whether to do fixed seating. And fixed seating could be to your benefit because then you're not putting out and taking in the tables all the time. But mainly it reduces the count of the people in the outdoor eating area to a real count. So if you fixed 10 seats and 5 tables, then your count would be 10. But if you did it on people per square foot for open area, it might be 20, it might be 30, could be a lot more, 50, depending on how the layout works. So conceivably, if you're allowing a section of sidewalk to go in between it to pass through it, then that could be considered part of the outdoor eating area within the fence or what have you. And so your numbers could get really high. Then whether to build a fence or not build a fence, obviously the fence helps delineate it, and it's relatively small, not like planter boxes, which would be at least a foot or 2 wide to delineate it. But the advantage of the planter boxes is that that can't be considered as an intervening room. So those are building department issues. The number of people that would be coming and whether it's allowed outside, and whether you're near a residence nearby who might complain or support it. Those are planning and zoning issues. So it's a 2-step process, and I haven't heard of any being rejected in the last couple years post-COVID, but we do see people who contact us who are thinking about doing this, and it's obvious that it would not be successful if they applied. And since it's relatively costly to apply, then they probably don't. So they either didn't apply or they used somebody else anyway. And so then to say there aren't many being turned down is probably accurate, because people who are going to be turned down don't submit on it. So how long does this whole process take? If your restaurant is already built, then you're probably in the best position, because if you know your toilets are going to calc in advance, you can get open and then worry about the time-consuming process of getting the entitlements allowed. Will they then make you provide building construction documents for whatever it is you're doing? That's dependent on your decision-making process. So again, if the area is fairly well defined outside, I would say just forget about that. If your one neighbor tenant is on the other side of a big column and the edge of your concrete in front of your shop is a concrete step down a curb going from concrete to asphalt, then you're defined on those two sides. If you're on the end cap, then you're pretty well defined. I would forget about the fence thing or the planter boxes. That would be my advice. But you can do it depending on the look that you're looking for. And then let's talk about inside malls and inside casino shopping areas and all that. In that case, there's no planning and zoning step in the process, and but you are still subject to the requirements for toilets. And depending on how the mall you're in is set up, you could already have, quote, a share in the calculations of a big bunch of multi-stall toilets that serve all the restaurants in the mall, or if you're in the food court or what have you. So adding and subtracting doesn't affect your end result of your toilets, but they could ask for written or diagrammatical proof that you have access to those toilets, just as you would if you're in remodeling your restaurant or changing from, I don't know, coffee shop to smoothie shop or something like that. Generally speaking, not a problem inside malls, inside casinos, but worth asking the question. And of course, in all these circumstances, you would typically have a landlord, and so you would talk to the landlord about whether they would allow it or not first, hopefully in conjunction with negotiating the lease, when landlords are generally inclined to say yes to most anything. But once you have your lease, they may say no. They obviously want to facilitate the profitability of your business, but they have processes and ways of looking at things that are not necessarily in your best interest. They might have already made an agreement with another tenant that there wouldn't be fake outdoor eating in the mall except from that one other tenant. So just assuming you could do it there might not work out for you either. You should try to include it in the lease. So how long does it all take? Planning and zoning, anywhere from informally done, maybe a couple weeks, but typically 2 to 3 months, and 3 months plus is not uncommon. And that doesn't matter whether you hire us or some other architect or some attorney to do it. These things that involve planning and zoning are subject to the schedule of the process that they've set up. So you might have a town board, you might have a planning commission, city council, county commission, and all those meet at regularly scheduled intervals. And then in between each one of those public hearing type meetings, your project goes back to the bureaucracy, who hopefully can do whatever needs to be done in the interim. So there may be some give and take in a public hearing or some specific direction. The town board wants this or doesn't want that, and then you'll either have to edit your drawings or stipulate to it in a letter, or possibly sit down and meet with staff over what the concern was, and then staff lets you go on to the next step. So if these public hearings are less than 2 weeks apart, a lot of times you have to wait till the next cycle for the following public hearing, the next step in the public hearing process. And that's because the bureaucracy is backed up. They can only take just so much at a time, so you're in the queue, and they're pretty good about getting to things, somewhat expeditiously. But it is a government process, so you can't just go down there and expect to get through it in an afternoon. So what if you get turned down? What if it's rejected? What if the neighborhood doesn't want it? What do you do then? So normally while you're in the process, especially an entitlements process, you have an opportunity to temporarily delay your submission and go through a public hearing process voluntarily to invite the neighbors to come and see what you're going to do or what have you, and try to work it out with the neighborhood or whoever's objecting as much as you can. And then you don't lose your place in the submission process by putting your process on hold temporarily while you invite the neighbors to a meeting to do whatever you're going to do. And so your other possibility is, if it looks like you're just going to get flat turned down, you can pull your submission and then resubmit later on with a new, actually just, you can resubmit the whole exact same thing all over again. But most of the reason why you would want to pull it is if they objected to how it looked, then you could pull it and then change the way it looked and then submit with the new look. If you get turned down in the end, if it's just a no, then you're still allowed to submit and ask again. And in most jurisdictions, there's some kind of a delay between the last turn down and when you can go back and try to get another bite at the apple if you want. But it's usually pretty long. When you get approvals, what have you got? You get a letter that's called a notice of final action, which tells you under what circumstances you're allowed to do whatever it is you want to do and what's required of you to do that. And these approvals in entitlement may not be forever. They might just go with the tenant, so it would be just for you. And if you later decided to sell the business to someone else, they'd have to go back through the process again to get it approved for them. Or it could be for just an interval of time. So a lot of times when things are contested from the neighborhood and it's approved, it will be approved on a short interval. So maybe they'll say, we'll allow it for a year, and then we're going to have a hearing where everybody comes back a year from now to discuss how it went, and then we'll consider whether we want it to go on or not. And so that's a possibility. That's about it relating to restaurants and the built environment. I will also say, not covered by this video is a process for getting outdoor events approved, things that might happen out in the street for some special event or things like that. Similar process, but different. We'll try to do a different video on it one day. This video is not about that. Do watch the entitlement process video, and it goes into a little bit more detail about the steps and all that, but it's a little bit redundant to what you're seeing in this video also. I would say that it appears to be worth it to go in and get approved for outdoor eating right now, that the environment is good for approval, and once you have the approval, normally they don't curtail it after a year. You've just got it forever. And they do have the ability to withdraw it, so if there's some kind of problem, fights outside, or the police have to come or what have you, you can get these things revoked. But for normal business operations, no, I've never heard of that happening. And actually, it's really rare that I've heard of it being revoked at all. Even when they do the 1-year callback thing, normally the people who got the entitlement are pretty careful not to lose it by letting bad stuff happen associated with it. So that's it. What do we charge for this? You have to call me and tell me about your specific circumstances. The initial meeting in our office for commercial projects is always free. And like I said before, there are others that do this. Most of them are attorneys. Not all architects do this. And this isn't necessarily part of the mainstay of what we do in our business, but it is something that this architectural practice does frequently. And it seems like we almost always have one somewhere in the course of these kind of processes. Either we've just signed a contract for it, or just finished one up, or we have a couple underway. And I do have one underway right now. So it's pretty common. And it does seem to be, from the people we've done these for, they've reported back in the past that they thought it was worth it. But it can be frustrating and annoying, like any government approval process. It's bureaucracy is the same way throughout the world, and the bureaucrats here are actually pretty nice people when we've got to know them, and we have gotten to know them. But the nature of the process is that it's going to be inherently annoying because it's slow and costly. And so what alternative do you have if you don't like it? There are some people who are politically connected that just get this stuff approved magically. I can't explain why, but I can tell you to get politically connected is more expensive than paying us to take you through the normal process. And there may be some kind of uses where being politically connected is going to be beneficial to you, but it doesn't seem to matter that much in this process. If you're following everything correctly and you're properly managed and properly run, then should be okay and allowable. So I don't want to discourage anyone from going ahead with it. So with that, my name is Ken Small, and I'm with SSA Architecture in Las Vegas, Nevada, 702-873-1718. I've been practicing in the Las Vegas area for over 25 years, and so from that I think I know how. These kind of rules and the nuances of them are ever changing, so this video is pretty general. But if you're in the immediate vicinity of Las Vegas, unincorporated Clark County, Henderson, Northtown, those areas, this is pretty much the way it works.